Hello everybody, just a quick interjection before we get into today's episode. I'm the host of the show, Eric aka Gingerino. As a heads up, when I first recorded this episode, none of the videos of hands-on gameplay footage of Avowed had released yet. And as I'm editing this right now, with a busy season at UPS, it's the day of when I usually upload, so I don't really have time to do a deep dive into a lot of the news. But suffice it to say, there definitely is news about Avowed, even though I say in this episode that there isn't. Basically, if you want to know what's up, go onto YouTube, just type Avowed, and you're going to see a lot of hands-on gameplay from people who have played the game. Mortismal did a 40-something minute video of his experience, just talking about everything that he had with the game, which I think was really good commentary. It offers a lot of, I think something gamers understand, like the little things that make games and what makes them enjoyable. Maddie Plays also talked about it. There is also a video from the official Xbox podcast on YouTube interviewing the devs about Avowed and some things that we can experience, as well as that host's experience playing the first couple hours. And I think there's even 45 or 90 minutes. I think it's done in 2 parts. There's even just like this straight up let's play. This guy just playing the game of Avowed, the first 2 hours of it, or at least after the prologue, when you're in the area of Dawnshore, trying to head to the city of Paradis, and there's a lot of interesting stuff. So if you want to see first-hand gameplay of Avowed, check all that stuff out. I'm definitely going to peruse through that stuff, but I do want to set the expectation for you, the listener, especially if you've been listening for a long time. There's simply too much video for me to go through, especially during this busy season while working at EPS, for me to comb through it with a fine-tooth comb. So I am going through these videos. I'm taking screenshots of unique item descriptions. I'm taking screenshots of things that I'm not sure what they are, or I think that they're interesting. I am checking out all of the NPC names that we mention. You should see my notepad. I just have literally pages of stuff already. But I'm not going to be going through it with a fine-tooth comb, but I will be doing an episode or so about the stuff that I saw in all of these different gameplay footage, stuff that is mostly related to the lore, because that's what we're talking about here. But I will talk about some of the gameplay aspects as well. Overall, though, just as a quick preview of it, I am super excited for the game of Avowed. It looks great, and people are reporting that it feels great as well, that exploration is really rewarding for players who are into that, and for me, that's kind of the most exciting thing, because we're going to be able to actually look into nooks and crannies, find little pieces of gear to upgrade our character, but also pieces of lore. There's already a few books that the player characters in these videos have found that we know of from the previous Pillars games that we can actually read, and there's a few other notes and books that are new that we haven't been able to see yet. So I'm really excited to dive into that. It looks and feels, apparently, like a game set in the World of Eora, which, as you can imagine, excites me and hopefully a lot of you that listen to this show as well. But anyways, I'll save all that for a future update. The only thing that I will say is that I can confirm by watching I think it was Mortismal's gameplay, that the character of Sansa, who is a character from the Deadfire game, makes an appearance in Avowed. I don't think that they have a major role, but we do definitely see and interact with them, so that was exciting to see. So yeah, anyways, let's jump into the episode, and I will cover some of this stuff either next week or the week after, or probably both. Toodles!
Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, as created by Obsidian Entertainment. I'm your host, Eric aka Gingerino. Thank you all for listening. Let's get into today's lore.
Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining me on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. For those wondering why we paired those games together, it's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. So as the theory goes, if we look into the first 2 Pillars of Eternity games, we can appreciate the nuance and storytelling that we'll see in Avowed, as well as understand some of the cameos or whatever else they're going to put in there. And it's also an opportunity for those of us who love Pillars of Eternity to just dive back into a world we know and love. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about one of the companions that we see through both Pillars of Eternity games, and one of the fan favorites, and that's Aloth Corfiser, the Elven Wizard Companion, voiced by Matt Mercer, and has a very interesting history and story arc through the two games, which we're going to discuss today. If you're new to this show, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here. I'll signpost you towards episode 0 if you want to know some of the foundational lore or the episodes to listen to that'll give you a good foundation on a lot of this other information, but you're more than welcome to start here today if that's what you want to do. I will give you a heads up, however, there are some spoilers for the companion quest associated with Aloth. Nothing regarding the major narrative of Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2, but we are going to be discussing Aloth and his companion quest through either game. Now, if you want to listen to some of today's episode, I will have a spoiler warning before we jump into the actual spoiler part, so you can listen from now and leave when you want if you're trying to avoid those. But otherwise, we're going to jump into that. No other main news to go off of today. I think I might just repeat last week's, which is that Avowed is available for pre-order now. I know I'm not a big fan of pre-orders in games. I know it's kind of maybe not the best practice, but as someone who does content creation, I definitely want to have that 5 days early access so I can play the game a little bit and kind of have some bearings on an episode I'd like to do. And, having all the other goodies is nice as well. I did pre-order the Steelbook edition, which was pretty expensive for me here in Canada, but whatever. I've been doing this for years. I may as well do it right, I suppose. There's been some other articles that have come out, as well as an interview with Ryan Warden that you can go check out. But as far as like the game of Avowed or Pillars of Eternity goes, there's no news about the game itself. The pre-order trailer, some more videos to look at in that sense, and to pre-order the game if that's what you want to do, or wait till it comes out on Game Pass and try it out. You do you. But that's everything as far as I can tell, so let's just jump right into today's lore.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
If you've played either Pillars of Eternity game, you'll be familiar with Aloth. He's one of the fan favorites and voiced by Matt Mercer. You see him as a companion through the entire Pillars of Eternity series that we have so far. He's a wizard by trade, as you'll learn pretty quickly into the game, with an Aedyran background. As well, he has some backstory in a short story that you can get on the Obsidian website, I believe through the Pillars of Eternity, the first Pillars of Eternity games website on Obsidian's actual website. There is a section under media where you can look up short stories. And one of the stories, which is, I believe, titled Until He Started Screaming, tells the story of Aloth when he was back at the academy. But we're going to go through Aloth's lore today. There's surprisingly not a ton of lore. We know who he is, the story that his quest line takes, and we have some of his background. So Aloth Corfiser is his last name, is an elven wizard, one of your companions from both Pillars games. He's obsessive and dutiful. He can be found in Gilded Vale near the entrance to the Black Hound Inn, which is a place in the first Pillars game. You notice pretty much right off the bat that there's something peculiar about him as he changes the way he talks. He's getting harassed by these locals because of something that he apparently did, and he's trying to talk them down, and then he kind of pipes up and insults one of them and seems to be not confused but dismissive of the entire thing as if it didn't happen. In the second game, you can find him in the Engwithan dig site masquerading as a person named Engfirth. So we'll talk a little bit about his background, move into the state of his soul, and talk about his history within the narrative for the first Pillars of Eternity game before we dive into his side quests. As I would have hopefully mentioned in the beginning of this episode, that there are going to be spoilers for Aloth's side quests, and for both of these games, I will save that for later in the episode. This is nothing major in terms of the overarching narrative for Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2, but it is going to talk about his particular side quest. So if you're wanting not to spoil the companion side quest, when I get to that point, just feel free to bow out there. So Aloth is 62 years old, which might sound a little old for you and I, but as you may have guessed if you've been in fantasy genre before, the 62 years old for an elf is not necessarily that old. They do live a little longer. He is of the wood elf variety, or shelterfolk, as they are called from the Seathwood, which is where they originate from, back in the mother nation of Aedyr. If you're interested on the nation of Aedyr, which is also where your player character from Avowed is going to be coming from, you can listen to my episodes on that. I think some of the early episodes of this podcast talk about Aedyr, and I also did a re-recording of some of those in more recent months. But either way, he is from the nation of the Aedyr Empire, specifically an area called the Seathwood, which is where the elven half of the Aedyran Empire comes from. He was brought up in a servile family that were employed by the Aedyran nobility, the Earl of Seathwood. So his family was a servant family that served the Earl of Seathwood, who is a noble. This is not a fairly unknown thing to happen within the world of Eora. Slavery is still a thing. These aren't necessarily slaves, they were more servants, but the idea that there could be a noble family that had families underneath them that were also the servants for, their estate or whatever, this isn't an unknown thing. And so that's what Aloth grew up as. He was surrounded by wealth and prosperity, even though he was part of the servant family. Young Aloth's home was not a particularly healthy one. His father worked hard as a steward to an earl, but his mother, who supported their home, was through a heimneg to another man. Heimneg is a ceremonial type of marriage. In the world of Eora, interracial breeding isn't really possible. You can't have a half-elf, half-human kind of a thing. But, the races can still be, inclined towards marriage towards each other, whether it's for romantic purposes or for more ceremonial purposes, which heimnegs usually are. So this is usually when there is going to be an elf/human marriage. It's called a heimneg. It's largely ceremonial, and it's usually to formalize a relationship for the purposes of politics and administration. So their mother supported their home through this heimneg. So through the marriage to this other family, she was able to get some sort of resources as a result, whereas his father worked hard as a steward to this earl. Now, who she ended up marrying was a person who was a thane. It was a 5-day ride away from the Seathwood. The income that she, the mother, received was enough to support her family, but she was away from home most of the time. So Aloth was left alone with his father at home. Aloth's father considered this to be shameful. Not only was his wife the primary breadwinner of the household, but her absence led him to believe that she was involved in an affair with the thane, which is a fair thing to think. I mean, she's married to this person, so there's probably some level of implication there. We don't really know. We haven't really seen it firsthand in the game. The rage that his father experienced drove him into alcoholism and frequent outbursts directed at his wife whenever she was around, and at Aloth when she was not. So Aloth grew up in an abusive household where his mother was not necessarily present all the time, and his father was highly abusive. So even though it sounds like Aloth had a better relationship with his mother, she wasn't really around all the time to be supportive and help out. Aloth studied as an arcane knight at the Broggan Academy, and you can learn about his time there through the book of Until He Started Screaming, which again you can get on Obsidian's website. It's completely free. It's not a long read, maybe 26 pages. Written by Carrie Patel, who is also the lead director for Avowed, by the way. So if you want to get a little bit more of a understanding for some of her writing from a while ago, then check it out. I think it's almost a decade at this point, really. But when he was a student at Broggan Academy, he was studying to become an arcane knight. He hoped to gain the patronage, which is essentially finding a job, by one of the lords, earls, or thanes in Aedyr. So I'm not going to ruin and spoil the book for you. There's not really a lot of lore-related stuff that I need to tell you, aside from the fact that while he was at Broggan Academy, he was, as it says here, he was trying to get a patronage, which is essentially a job working as an arcane knight. And so it follows his exploits to try to bring that to happen, some of which don't really come to fruition. And he takes this one route that is a little bit dangerous for him, largely in part because it risks exposing a great secret he has that is heavily stigmatized within the empire that he comes from. And we're going to talk about what that secret is in a minute. The only thing that I think is of note about the book is that there is an event within this book that helps him make a connection with a group called the Leaden Key. And we're going to talk about why that's important in just a second. Now, the secret that Aloth is concerned about people learning has to do with his abusive father and the relationship that he has with it. 5 years into his training, which would be at Broggan Academy, his father's beatings came to a head and resulted in Aloth's awakening. An awakening is when one of the past lives that your soul has comes to the forefront of your mind, or the personality from that past life comes to the forefront of your mind. Is how I kind of describe it, because in this world there is a cycle of reincarnation that happens. A body has a soul, you live a life, the body dies, the soul leaves the body, goes into the beyond, which is kind of like the afterlife, and then it leaves the beyond to enter into a new body. So you have these different bodies, but you have the same soul between them. And it's the unique mixture of soul and body that create the unique person within history. But there are some things that can happen as a result of this metaphysical setup. you can have things like awakenings, which is when your particular current self experiences the personality of a previous life kind of bubbling to the forefront of your consciousness. It's not like another person taking over your body, because it's the same soul that had that was living before, but now just housed in a new body. So it's almost like that personality is literally kind of in conflict with your current personality, if you will. Well, what happened is that Aloth was with his father, and he was struggling to cast some spells. I think it was Magic Missile and Flame Shields. He started kicking Aloth. And so curled up in the fetal position on the floor in the kitchen, Aloth retreated into himself, mentally speaking. This trauma caused his awakening, and a person named Isilmir, which would have been a person from a previous life, emerged to the surface of his psyche. It took over his body and filled up the parts of his soul that he had retreated from. So basically all the stuff that Aloth had mentally kind of retreated back into, Isilmir came to the forefront and filled all those spaces in. Isilmir is a lot different than Aloth. She lashed out against the father, breaking his arm in 3 different places, and he never raised his arm against Aloth again. Now, this is an important thing for Aloth. This is massively important. I mean, one, he managed to fight off his father. Well, not him, I guess, but sort of him in a way. He managed to fight off his father in a way that he's not going to get abused anymore. So that's kind of good. But now he has a big problem, because in the nation of the Aedyr Empire, there is a heavy stigmatization towards anything that has to do with soul sciences or soul maladies or soul infirmities, etc., etc. Within the world of Eora, the soul is a very real thing, and because it is a very real, concrete thing, there is a science around the soul called animancy. However, animancy is a scientific field of much controversy, and in the Aedyr Empire, animancy is actually outlawed. You're not allowed to practice animancy, and anything connected to it is viewed quite negatively and is almost certainly going to be illegal. So Aloth having an awakening, even though he's not necessarily doing something with animancy directly, him having an awakening is viewed very negatively, and he's very likely to just kind of captured and put away, or even just kind of never given the opportunity to move up in the world. He'll essentially, if he's not, imprisoned somewhere, then he's just not going to be able to reach for any sort of life within this location that he's living. And you got to remember, he's 5 years into his training at Broggan Hill Academy to become an arcane knight. So at this point, the idea of just dropping it all and going somewhere else, one, would raise a lot of suspicion, which would almost certainly out him as for who he is, but 2, it would abandon all the work that he has done. So continuing to read this article on the fandom website, on his mother's advice, fearing he would become an outcast, Aloth hid Isilmir and his awakening, in no small part due to the fact that Isilmir was an uncouth provincial farm from a very long time ago, judging by her Hillspeak vernacular. So that's something interesting about Isilmir the person, is that she is a personality from a long time ago, and you can tell this by her accent. Whenever Aloth speaks, but it's actually Isilmir taking over his body, you can tell based on the accent, which has got a strong, it's called Hillspeak, Hyl speak. That's the dialect within this game world. You can tell when she's taken over because she has this very strong accent. I don't know how to do it actually, but she says cocksfither a lot, which is one of the more notable words that you know when it's Isilmir. But yeah, she is an uncouth provincial person from a very long time ago. And so not only is this threatening to Aloth in the sense that he's had an awakening, but he also has this personality that is drastically different from his and doesn't necessarily share his ideals, and can kind of get in trouble when she takes over because she just doesn't really follow propriety the way Aloth does. In reading the book, until he started screaming, you understand the dynamic between Aloth and Isilmir a little bit better than I think you do in the games personally, because they have a little bit more of a back and forth in the book. In the game, obviously, you're the main player character, so most of the focus and attention is on you. So whenever there is interactions with Isilmir and Aloth, we don't get to see too much of it because, again, you're the focus of the game. But in the book, Aloth is the focus of the story. So if you're at all interested in Aloth and Isilmir, I highly recommend checking out the book. And you can see them having a back and forth of Aloth is trying to think of what do I do with this problem? I don't want to get caught with you, but obviously you are vying for some level of control, and she's also giving him advice on what you should do in a situation. It's a very interesting read. She tends to surface in stressful situations and then take control of Aloth's body, which we saw when he was being abused by his father. As well, in the book, Until He Started Screaming, he's under a lot of academic pressures, and he tries his best to stave off her control by falling into routine. Routine is familiar to Aloth, and it brings a source of comfort, and it brings a source of calm. And so when he does his routines, when he does his little rituals, whatever it is that he's doing, it just gives him a sense of stability, which helps him maintain control of his own body and mind. Which is directly contrasted against Isilmir's personality, who will act completely without thinking. Like, she will just fly off the handle and say things without thinking about, is this a good idea? Should I say or do this thing? Even the most minute of encounters, she will escalate a lot. As I mentioned, that's why Aloth has kind of developed, it says here on the fandom article, a pathological need for control. There is a few times when he has dropped his guard. One case has to do with a fellow named Ymir, who you meet in the second Pillars of Eternity game, which was a student at the academy that Isilmir attempted to pursue, which I find interesting, is this pretty boy elf who Isilmir thought was cute and wanted to, have some romantic inclinations towards. I don't know if Aloth necessarily felt the same way, though, so. This is the big secret for Aloth, and it's a massive part of who his character is. And you're going to definitely interact with this part of his character when you're playing the first game of Pillars of Eternity 2, and possibly as well in the second Pillars game. Because, you could kill him in the first game. That's definitely possible. Or you can even just not join him in the second game, and there's an outcome to that, which we'll talk about soon. But more importantly, I want to talk about a little bit more about one other thing that happened when he was in his training at the academy. So this was during his final year of training, which is around the same time that the book Until He Started Screaming, when the events of that book occurs. In his final year of training, there is a person that Aloth makes a connection with who turns out to be a member of the Leaden Key. And it is at this point where, if you don't want to have any spoilers regarding what happens with Aloth and that connection there, by all means, I would say jump out now. We're going to start diving into a little bit more of his companion story in the first Pillars of Eternity game. So here's your warning. Time to jump off the episode if you want to avoid those side quest spoilers. So there was an instructor at Broggan Hill Academy that was connected to the Leaden Key. The Leaden Key is a secretive organization dedicated to the goddess Woodica and the preservation of a massive secret that I'm not going to spoil here, but you can find out by the end of the Pillars of Eternity game if you want to play it. It's not pertinent to today's lore, so we're not going to talk about it, but there is a massive secret that the Leaden Key has that they don't want to get out. They're also dedicated to the goddess Woodica, goddess of law, justice, and right rulership, as well as vengeance, amongst other things. The Leaden Key has existed for thousands of years, and as I mentioned, they are basically a secret society. Aloth meets a member of the Leaden Key and convinces him to join. Aloth ends up joining the Leaden Key because it would provide postings far away from the Seathwood, where Aloth's father is, and the Earl. You got to remember, he was just in Broggan Hill Academy looking for a patronage, essentially trying to find a job, and he wasn't necessarily finding the most success, and he is starting to get in a little bit of trouble, and he also doesn't want to stay in Aedyr, where he is going to have to constantly worry about Isilmir. So the idea that he could get a job with this secret organization in a posting far away from the Aedyr Empire is kind of an attractive opportunity for him. He doesn't have to worry so much about Isilmir. He's going to have work that can help, with the stuff that he's been trained for, and he can be away from his abusive father. So there's a lot of positive reasons why he would take this opportunity. As well, he had also learned at his time at Broggan Hill that several of his colleagues had abandoned their studies as an arcane knight to pursue animancy, which you'll remember is the soul science we talked about. And Aloth felt that animancy needed to be stopped. Aloth is definitely a proponent of regulating or outlawing animancy. And Aloth, like many people within Aedyr, will have heard of many instances of animancy going wrong. And so Aloth feels that it should be stopped and joins the Leaden Key, which also believes the same thing. The Leaden Key offers solution to these problems, and Aloth sincerely believed that they wanted to keep Kith from the folly of their own foolish ambitions. So he joined the Leaden Key with good reason. Aloth's work in the Leaden Key required espionage. He arrived in the Dyrwood, which is the setting for the first Pillars game. It's essentially a colonized area across the ocean from the Aedyr Empire where he is from, and he settled there in 2822 AI, which is only a year before when the game actually starts, the first Pillars game. Now, he was there to observe animancy and how it was spreading within the region. So he's basically just a spy, just reporting back to the Leaden Key about what's going on with animancy in the region, because animancy in the Dyrwood, even though it was a colony of Aedyr, they had achieved their own independence, and they had opened up animancy to be unregulated, and most importantly, just not outlawed. He met with his handler every few months to receive the reports and issue new leads about what was going on with animancy. His last assignment was to Gilded Vale, which is a village in Pillars of Eternity. It's the first major village that you interact with in the game. And he was there trying to keep an eye on events that were surrounding the local lord, Rajik VII. But he had lost contact with his handler at the Leaden Key and didn't know what to do. It's at this point in time that you, the Watcher character in the first Pillars of Eternity game, interact with Aloth. And Aloth sees an opportunity there to work with you, as well as trying to figure out what's going on with his handler. And so he follows you on the adventure from that point onwards, working for the Leaden Key, just trying to figure out what's going on and trying to basically kind of using you in the process. Aloth is rather guarded. He doesn't open up on everything right away. He does tell you a lot about himself. Like when I first interacted with Aloth in the game, I thought, man, he's pretty open about a lot of stuff, which is pretty, I guess, typical of video games. I am this person from this place and I have this history and blah, 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 blah. Also, it's nice to meet you. What's your name? It's just immediately come out with their entire backstory right away. But he is rather guarded about a lot of stuff, obviously, especially about his awakened soul malady. He does voice his concerns about animancy when he's with you, initially strictly opposed to the practice, but he becomes conflicting while he travels with you through the first Pillars game. He doesn't initially tell you that he's part of the Leaden Key, which is fair because it's a secret organization. You're not supposed to tell people. You don't put it on your LinkedIn profile that you're part of the Illuminati, so you don't tell people that you're part of the Leaden Key. However, through the adventures that he has with you, the Watcher, his eyes kind of start opening to the true nature of the Leaden Key and how it relates to Widewind's legacy, which was a soul malady going on in the Dyrwood at the time, also known as the Hollowborn crisis. Essentially, babies were being born across the Dyrwood without a soul inside of them, and so they're just an empty vessel. There's no person there. It's just a body breathing, blinking. Like there's no person there. So it's a very, very atrocious and awful thing that's going on, and Aloth kind of learns through these adventures that the Leaden Key is involved in that some way. And so he starts to kind of feel conflicted about, like, what's this group I've joined and why are they doing this thing? Is animancy actually that bad? And he eventually does reveal to you, the player character, his connection to the Leaden Key after he witnesses an event at animancy hearings in the city of Defiance Bay, which was meant to try to decide whether or not animancy should be unregulated or fully regulated or outlawed entirely. It's at this point, you as the player character, you can either forgive Aloth for his secrecy or you can banish him, basically removing him from your party or your companions, which most people won't choose because, you want to keep the companions in the game. But if depending on whether or not you're doing a role play, you might be like, nah, man, get out of here. Like none of that's going to be allowed to happen here, especially since you're kind of against the Leaden Key. There could also be concerns by you, the player, that like, well, maybe he's trying to gain my trust by opening up about this, but he's actually still aligned with them, right? So there's a good reason to banish him from your group, but you can also choose to forgive him. What you choose to do here will affect his ending. If you choose to banish him, the story just unceremoniously ends. He doesn't know where he belongs, so he just heads to Glonfoth in desperation. He tracks down one of the ancient machines within the ruins there, and he ends his life by sacrificing his soul to it. So he ends up basically dying if you don't keep him in your party. If you do decide to keep him in your party, then what happens with Aloth will express itself within the ending slides of the game. The main thing that happens with his side quest, his personal story, though, is what happens to Izilmi. Throughout the course of your adventures together, you, the player character, come to learn that he has an awakened soul, and he has this other personality of Isilmir within him. And there's little hints of it throughout the game. Like, you have these moments where he doesn't talk like his normal self and he says things he doesn't normally say, but he tries to dismiss it. And even if you, the player character, are a little suspicious, there's no dialogue options to continue it on until he finally reveals it to you. And during your adventures after he has revealed to you that he has an awakened soul and that this person Isilmir is there, she now is a little more free reign running around. There's a lot of interesting dialogue between Aloth and the other companions, especially Aedyr, another companion that you have, who rather likes Isilmir. He likes bringing her out and having conversations with her. But throughout the adventures, more having to do with Aloth, your player character, the Watcher, can help influence Aloth to either accept Isilmir or take an opportunity that will help him suppress Isilmir. So essentially, you can either help Aloth to accept that Isilmir is part of his life and let her continue to exist and have them coexist in a more, I would say, positive way together, or you can convince him that you need to suppress Isilmir and help him to do so to the point where Isilmir basically disappears. He's no longer there anymore. It's like an unawakening, if you will. That is the result of what you can do with the player character to Aloth. So you either choose to forgive him or not, and then he kills himself or he continues traveling with you. And if he continues traveling with you, you help him either hold on to or get rid of Isilmir. Personally, I like holding on to Isilmir. I think she's really interesting and offers a lot of fun dialogue. And she's really also fun to hear from in the second Pillars of Eternity game. And that's kind of what I was referencing earlier when I said that you might get to see this side of her in the second Pillars game, is because if you decide in the first game that she needs to be suppressed or go away, that this is Aloth's life, he shouldn't have to share it with another person who already lived their own life, then you can convince him to suppress her, and then she's not around for the second Pillars game. So it's up to you what you think you would do. I know I chose to have him accept her, but either way, either one is a good option. There's good reason for both. And that is the conclusion for his quest line in the first Pillars of Eternity game. Now, before we dive into the quest line for the second Pillars of Eternity game in Deadfire, we have to talk about what happens in the 5 years between those two games, and it depends on what you chose to do in first Pillars game.
And we're going to talk about it right after this commercial break.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
Now, so at the end of the first Pillars of Eternity game, you are at a location called Sun and Shadow, and you're going to be making a very important decision with the main antagonist and what happens to him as a result of the final battle. Now, how this affects Aloth is it basically defines his life for over half a decade, which is how long there is between the two Pillars games. For the first time in years, Aloth will return to Aedyr, where he is originally from, even if he still has Isilmir at his psyche, like he didn't suppress him, he'll still go to visit. Either visiting his father if he ended up favoring authority, or visiting his mother if he favors autonomy, which will be determined based on the actions that you and him take throughout the game. The decisions you make as the Watcher character influences what he experiences, and therefore how he kind of processes information and thinks about the world. And so whether he starts moving in a more pro-authority or pro-autonomy route will be determined based off of what you do. And that'll determine if he sees his father or his mother when he goes back to Aedyr. If Aloth did not suppress Isilmir, they come to an agreement where she can partake in battle. So it's just kind of an agreement that they have of where she's allowed to have autonomy. Aloth refocuses his goals on the Leaden Key, with his focus being primarily on making Kith as strong as ever, Kith being the civilized races of the world. And how he will focus on the Leaden Key will again depend on the decisions you make throughout the course of the first Pillars of Eternity game. He is either going to decide to now lead the Leaden Key, he is going to try to lead it in what he thinks would be a better vision for the secretive organization, or he is going to try to dismantle the Leaden Key from within. He's found it very difficult to do so. So far, at least when you talk to him in the second Pillars of Eternity game, you learn a little bit about the history of what went on there. Being a secret organization that tries to influence entire societies. There was an example that he gives about this village that was practicing ritual bloodletting, and he tried to remove this practice from their society, and it kind of backfired, and they kind of ended up doubling down and doing it even more as a result. And he's kind of like weighing the cost of his decisions that he has as either the leader of the Leaden Key or even as the leader trying to dismantle it, recognizing that like his choices are going to have consequences and other people are going to be paying for those consequences. And this example with the village doing bloodletting, it will change depending on whether or not he's trying to lead or dismantle the Leaden Key. So for example, if he is trying to lead the Leaden Key, it says that Aloth thought that ending the ritual would happen if he put a new leader in. So he decides to put a new leader into this village that is doing this ritual bloodletting. But what ended up happening is the person that he ended up putting in charge not only didn't do anything to stop the bloodletting, that this person actually started taxing villagers to pay for a plantation, and then ended up conscripting half of the village people to work in her plantation. So this person that Aloth put in charge to try to get rid of this bloodletting ritual that was having people die as a result, he ended up not making that go away, but he also ended up having the people of this village being put into slavery. If he is trying to dismantle the Leaden Key, then Aloth thinks that the best way to end this bloodletting ritual in this village is to assassinate the tyrannical priest who is presiding over it. So he arranges for the priest to have an accident. Unfortunately, the villagers took this as an ill omen and began bloodletting even more. And this is what I meant when I say they ended up doubling down. So people were bloodletting more often, they were turning on each other if someone was thought to be giving too little, and villagers were beginning to die at an increased rate. And this little moment kind of shows how the consequences of like leadership and choices and the price other people pay for their decisions. And it's something that Aloth is wrestling with. Even if he's not trying to lead the Leaden Key, he's trying to dismantle it, he still has to recognize that his choices have those consequences. When you meet him in the Deadfire Archipelago, he's trying to track down an ancient and remote Leaden Key sect that was in the area. He wanted to observe their workings and use the knowledge for his goals, either leading the Leaden Key or dismantling it. For this purpose, he created the persona of Engfirth, a talented pupil with a tragic past, to ingratiate himself with the Valiant Animancers at Port Mage. So basically, he is trying to spy on the area in Deadfire to find this Leaden Key, so he's come up with an alter ego to kind of cover who he is, typical spy stuff, right? And so he calls himself Engfirth. He's a talented little animancer, and he aligns himself with this group of historians and animancers out of a town called Port Mage, which is it's the first settlement that you actually go to in the Deadfire game. And you can run to him pretty early in the game. He introduces himself to the group as Engfirth, even though you, of course, will recognize him. He, of course, seeing you, the Watcher, here in the Deadfire Archipelago, he's got his own interests, you've clearly got yours. It makes sense to him that y'all should get together and continue adventuring again. You can help each other out. You can refuse to bring him with you. You can be like, nah, Aloth, sorry, you're not coming with us, you're going to be on your own. And if you do that, he will pursue his goals on his own. He will eventually find where this Leaden Key sect used to be within the Deadfire Archipelago, which is, there's no one there anymore except for a Huana tribe. And when he comes in trying to investigate the area and the ruins, he is eventually killed by the Huana tribe. So when you as the party show up to this island later in the game, Aloth's body is just laying there in the middle of, I think it's like the throne room or some equivalent to that. And yeah, it's a pretty emotional scene, especially if you've known Aloth from the first game. Aedyr takes a rather emotional response to that. But assuming that you do take him with you in the second Pillars of Eternity game to help with the adventures, he will go alongside you, and they're going to want to find the Leaden Key sect that used to or is currently working within the Deadfire Archipelago. That's what he's looking for. Long story short, he ends up finding Engwithan ruins on this island, the same one that he would be killed on if you didn't let him come with you in the party. And you see a vision there on this island of Theos, the main antagonist from the first game, being at this island in the distant past. And he does something to this island and they end up killing him. But Theos is clearly up to something here. And it seems that he is either positioning the tribe to be here, or he is trying to form their tribal identity in such a way that it fits his end goals. Even though they kill him in the process, if you know anything about Theos, he just ends up kind of coming back reborn in the next life. But upon witnessing this vision, how you respond with Aloth will determine kind of the end slides for him within the game of Pillars of Eternity 2. Because he's wrestling with this entire notion of I am now the leader of this sect, this cult, this secret organization, and the choices I make have impact. should I continue doing this or should I not? And so how you respond to this vision of seeing Theos leading the Leaden Key in just this one instance will help him make that decision. He'll either decide to leave his pursuit and stop trying to take down the Leaden Key because he doesn't feel like he is making the right choices, or he will stay within as a leader and try to make the decisions that he thinks is right, even though he knows that sometimes they might be wrong or sometimes there's going to be unforeseen consequences, and that's just part of the deal. And that's the story of Aloth from the second Pillars of Eternity game. We've followed his journey from his history in Aedyr when he was a child and was being beaten by his father, who was at home more often than his mother because his mother was married to another family through the ceremonial union of Heimnig. And through these beatings, all the way up until he was even, like in college level age, eventually his soul awakened an alternate personality, Izilmir, a personality from one of his soul's past lives, and it bubbled to the surface, broke his father's arm in 3 different places, but now became a problem for Aloth living in a nation where this kind of thing is not viewed favorably. He was still in training to be an arcane knight, and ended up finding contacts that later in the Pillars of Eternity game, we discover he ended up joining the Leaden Key cult. After having his eyes open to the true nature of the Leaden Key and confronting the main antagonist of the game, who was also the leader of that cult, Aloth decides to take over, either as their leader or to dismantle them. However, through the processes and adventures in the second Pillars of Eternity game, he might abandon that pursuit, recognizing that he is ill fit for the position and the consequences of his choices, or he will choose to stay as the leader and try to reconcile the fact that there are unforeseen consequences. It's quite a character arc, and Aloth is definitely one of the more interesting characters, especially once you start to include Izilmir into the conversation, which if he suppresses her in the first game, she is entirely not present in the second game. Aloth is one of my favorites. I definitely am, like, when I, for example, like, this is another game, but playing Mass Effect, I always liked having Garrus and Tali around because they were across all 3 of the main trilogy. And so with Pillars of Eternity, I really liked having Aloth as well as Aedyr and Pelagina. Well, kind of Pelagina. I'm a little meh on her, but still, I liked having Aloth around. He's someone more familiar, very well acted, obviously voiced by Matt Mercer, who also does Aedyr and a number of other NPCs throughout both games. But he's definitely a familiar character and one that I grew attached to. And I know a lot of people did as well. And so now here comes the question that we always ask on the show is, what might this have to do with Avowed?
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
The obvious answer would be that in some way, shape, or form, Aloth makes an appearance in the game of Avowed. Now, I do think this is unlikely, just because they've said that there are NPCs from Deadfire that are going to be in Avowed as cameos, and Aloth is in Avowed, but he's also in the first Pillars game, so it seems a little bit misleading. As well, I think Aloth would then become way too much of a focus for a lot of players who are in the game, and that might take away from the overarching narrative of Avowed. But Aloth would be a contender to be in the Living Lands. He is familiar with the Empire of Aedyr, which is the nation your player character in Avowed is going to be from. As well, he might be the leader of this secret organization, the Leaden Key, and they might have interest in the Living Lands, and so there's very good reason why he might be there. And, being voiced by Matt Mercer, who we already know voices some NPCs in the game of Avowed. We see him in the Dawnbreaker quest that was featured for Avowed, I think it was the Gamescom footage, that the quest that they showed off and all that. We saw that Matt Mercer voices a character there, so there's no reason to think that he also wouldn't voice other characters in the game, since they already had him on staff or on contract to do some voice acting. Aloth was one of his characters, so there's no reason we couldn't. It's actually kind of favorable, I think. There's a pretty decent chance that Aloth could make an appearance in the game of Avowed. I still am not 100% sure if that's the choice that Obsidian is going to make, if they think that's going to add or detract from the experience that Avowed is going for outside of Pillars of Eternity, but it's certainly possible. Besides Aloth himself, there is also his family. Perhaps his mother or his father, for whatever reason, will be sent to the Living Lands, and you'll interact with them, and you won't realize until a significant amount of interaction who they actually are if you've played the other Pillars of Eternity games. You might talk to a man or a woman who remarks about how, I had a son who was in Broggan Hill Academy and is training to be an arcane knight, but he had his soul awakened, and that led to kind of a problem. I don't know where he is now. Last time I heard, he was at the Deerwood. He came to visit for a little bit before heading out into the Deadfire. So, what I'm saying? Like, they might just drop these little story clues of who they actually are, and so maybe we'll meet Aloth's parents, who knows? Or one of the individuals from the Until He Started Screaming book, even. So that's really the only way I can see any of this happening. Perhaps if we run into the Leaden Key, we might read some notes or letters about Aloth, even if he isn't in the Living Lands. So I think you could probably expect there to be some level of mention or some sort of like Easter egg alluding to him, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be in the game. Though I do think that he would be a good contender for an NPC to bring in from the Pillars of Eternity series to the game of Avowed, definitely. What about you? Do you think Aloth is going to appear in Avowed? Let me know what you think. worldofeora@gmail.com. And now let's close today's episode. I'll start off with what I've been playing, in case y'all have been playing the same thing. I have been playing Veilguard, but by the time this episode comes out, I'll probably have stopped playing Veilguard to play Stalker 2. That's coming out on Game Pass. I've been really looking forward to that game, and I want to give that one an honest try. So I have been enjoying Veilguard, but it hasn't really got its hooks in me in a deep way that I feel the need to press on to the end. But I do want to return to it afterwards. Otherwise, I haven't really been playing anything different. I will recommend a YouTube channel to you, although I'm sure a lot of people out there, you're probably already aware of this, so this might not be news to you, but hey, I'm just something to recommend. If you are into game design, if you're interested at all in how developers and game designers think about when they make games, or you're interested in how the design influences you as a player, there's a couple YouTube channels that I've been watching, and it's by a guy who does Design Delve. He has his channel, JM8 is the username he goes by on YouTube. He was with The Escapist when it was The Escapist, but he left with a number of other individuals to help form Second Wind, and these are all on YouTube. And on The Escapist, he was called Design Delve, or maybe on Second Wind it's called Design Delve. Either way, there's a few different playlists of the stuff he has done, and it's been very interesting. I love watching this stuff. I have a huge interest in game design, not just how do you make it pretty, or how do we set up a tutorial or something like that, but asking questions of how do we pace players? How does the environment funnel players to certain directions? How do we make players do certain things, but we give them this feeling like they chose to do these certain things? How do we entice players to explore and go in certain directions, but not get them too far away from where we hope the critical path is going to be? How does making mechanical parts of a game influence the way players think about the game? How do you get players to reach a flow state, which is essentially a mastery of the controls to the point where you don't have to think about it anymore? It's really interesting stuff. The one that really got me on was when he did a video about Hyperlight Drifter, which is a game I absolutely love because it's a game that doesn't communicate to its player through any language that it doesn't talk, it doesn't have text boxes in English, it doesn't have voiceovers in English. There is no direct language communication. Everything is just done through the environment and through you just intuitively pressing buttons and figuring things out on your own. And when you do talk to NPCs in the game, a text box does come up, but there isn't text in it. It's just these fleeting images that you need to interpret when you look at these images. Oh, okay, it looks like a village of people, and then there was a calamity, and now you're recovering from it. Oh, but you're missing a thing, and you need this relic or whatever. You're interpreting these series of images rather than reading a text box. And I thought that was such an interesting way to approach game design, and it was really cool to see his breakdown of how do you teach players how to play the game when you are not providing tutorial, right? How do you tell a player press X to jump, but you're not allowed to use the words press X to and jump? And I thought that was really interesting. And they do it some pretty obvious ways. Well, obvious to them maybe, wasn't to me at first, right? How you teach a player to use the attack button. Well, you put a bunch of plants in their way until they start button mashing and realize, oh, I slashed these plants away by pressing the X button on my Xbox controller or the square button on my PlayStation controller. And now it works. And so that's how they teach players how to play a game without directly telling them. And I love things like that. I love seeing how designers trick us into doing things that they actually want, but give us the illusion that we're smarter than we really are. So I don't know. If anyone's into that, check it out. Design Delve is what you can look up on YouTube. And you're more than likely able to find all of his content that way. But that's all for today's episode, everyone. Thank you so much. If you want to reach out to me and ask a question, have a comment, criticism, whatever, or even just start a conversation about this geeky stuff or any game that you're playing, you can do so at worldofeora@gmail.com. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can do so at worldofeora. If you would like to support the show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofeora. That's just there for those who get value out of supporting the shows that they enjoy. If you want to support the show but you don't want to do so monetarily, consider leaving a rating and review if you're on Apple, or leaving comments on Spotify. When you engage with the algorithms in these ways, it sends my shows to other people who are listening to similar shows that you are, and it just helps exposure. I'm not trying to do this to make money or anything like that, but the more people that enjoy the show, the better, I think, if they want to. Either way, you guys seem to be enjoying it, so here I am. We're going to continue making this content well into Avowed showing up and afterwards. But that's everything, guys. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode about one of the companions we see through the entire Pillars of Eternity series, Aloth. I went back and forth on it. I think it's Aloth Corfiser, our elven wizard companion with a traumatic past and a very, I would say, high-pressure future or present, depending on what decisions you made in the game. Anyways, thanks for everybody for listening. I've been your host, Eric, a.k.a. Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.